basically, as you can see that the entire deliberation will center around excellence in pedagogy. And pedagogy, I think, has acquired different connotations now. It has got different dimensions apart from the basic, fundamental tenets that we have learned from Socratic pedagogy and all that. I think it remains that basic tenets have got eternal value and universal relevance even today, the Socratic pedagogy. But then we have other dimensions coming in as expected in life. There are different kinds of complexities, different kinds of situations in which we have to strive for excellence in pedagogy, to my mind, based on these basic tenets itself. So therefore, we will sail along the deliberations, and I would request you to take part in the interactive sessions that will follow the main addresses by the resource persons of the faculty members. With this, I hand over to Sujit.
The two-day event which we have planned centered on the theme of excellence. You might have already got the concept note which we have prepared on excellence, but still I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll set the context to the events that will unfold in the next 2 days, and then we'll invite Professor Sudarshan for the distinguished keynote address. Excellence, we have conceived it as a kind of a search. It's the search for an unknown. It's the search probably for a new life. I take the privilege here to use the title of the novel by Orhan Pamuk, The New Life. The book starts like this: I read a book and my whole life was changed. You happen to read a book and then you feel that the reality of the book is a better reality than the reality in which we live, and we go on a perpetual pursuit of that reality. But you can't get into another reality without negating the false reality within which you live. So the entire book is about different kinds of experiments in search of a reality about which you just have a glimpse, about which you just have a fascination. I mean, excellence is something like that. You can't start the pursuit of excellence having a preconceived notion of excellence. It's a self-evolution. It's a self-becoming of the being. It's a perpetual pursuit of an unknown. But we know that maybe that even the destination does not matter. All it matters is the path, the search of the new life. So even in Pamuk's novel, the protagonist is going around and around. He's traveling in buses so that he could defeat the time and get into this alternative reality which he read in the novel. He is trying to die so that life will end and he will get into the new reality of the new life. He is trying to find out from all the spots where accidents have happened, that what happened to those who perished in the accident, because he wants to create a new life. So maybe sometimes, that at least Pamuk reinforces this understanding that excellence is not about the destination, but it's all about that pursuit, and it's the pursuit which is meaningful, no matter whether we reach the destination or not. So philosophically, it's more the being, the Dasein in perpetual pursuit of its own beingness. So the becoming is what matters here. Excellence could also be a desire. So as I said, it's not the destination. Whether we'll climax in the destination or not is what matters, but actually the irresistible desire in the path. The same, the protagonist in Pamuk's novel, The New Life, there is an irresistible desire to discover something. He doesn't discover anything even by the end of the novel. The novel ends by saying that it was all that pursuit and that desire which permeated his mind all during the journey that mattered. That was the new life. A life without any desire. There was an intense desire in him, which this desire for the new life, or this glimpse of the new life, had created in him. So maybe excellence is the desire in that pursuit of that unknown destination is probably what makes us excellent. So the path is more important. That's why we have named this as the path of excellence. It's not about attaining the excellence. It's all about the finest existence could be that being on a path to excellence, and then maybe to higher excellence and to the highest excellence. In a higher education parlance, this philosophy translates in very interesting ways. Number one, it also believes in, excellence is also about the desire I mentioned, the path, but in this path we get transformed. It's about the transformative power of the knowledge. As we teach, we learn. As we teach, we self-evolve. It's a constant self-perfection through teaching and through learning. So we want to emphasize this transformative power of knowledge in this larger session, and definitely that's why we have crafted a session which Professor Upasana Mahanta will do today, which is on curriculum designing. Curriculum designing is actually the art of organizing the knowledge. You change the sequential order in which you arrange the knowledge, the learning experience becomes altogether different. Curriculum can be imagined and reimagined, discovered and rediscovered. So she'll talk about that rediscovery in this session on curriculum designing. It's basically on a more thoughtful note, it's the art of organizing human knowledge. Then, having gained the knowledge, one way is revel in the bliss of knowledge, but then you know that silence is quite painful. There is an irresistible tendency to speak, to self-express, and that comes through research. So research is not about meeting the institutional requirements that we shall have 2 publications or 3 publications. Research is about that irresistible desire to self-express. Having known the reality, having got a voice, or having even sensed that we are a voice, silence is quite tragic. We are trying to break that silence through the research. So research is all about that self-expression, and that self-expression, if I may use Professor Shiv Vishwanathan's expression, it should be joyful, it should be playful, not regulated by methods. It should be like a free-flowing expression of the self. So tomorrow, I'll hold a session on what does it mean to research playfully and joyfully, free from all kinds of scary terminologies like methods and hypothesis and all that. So we'll try to overcome the horror associated with methodology and to make writing a much more free-flowing self-expression. We'll also have a session on the means to achieve all this. Well,
and that means come in the form of a market. And in this context, it's a publication market. So Professor Indranath Gupta will hold a session tomorrow. He'll tell us about what kind of strategic games we need to play in order to get our papers on board. Having a voice is not enough. Getting that voice sounded to the larger public is equally important. So he'll talk about that means of self-expression, how to get there. So in the end, I would just conclude by saying that we have given more emphasis to that desire, the path. This was a conscious choice. I had a lot of brainstorming with Professor Upasana Mahanta. What shall be the title of this conference? Should it be Attaining Excellence? And then we understood it's foolhardy to think in that line. It's better to be on that path, no matter how far is that. We might find conflicting paths also there, but pretty much like Parmenidean, even if you traverse the path of opinion or the path of truth, you will find yourself that there is a single path which appeared in like multiple paths before you. It's all a perceptual illusion and nothing more than that. So important thing is about being on that path to excellence, not about attaining excellence. I personally don't think there is something like attaining an excellence that will have a salvation someday. But the becoming of the being is more important rather than anything else. So with that, I invite Professor Sudarshan to give the keynote address on the theme, on the path to excellence. So, welcome.
Be here at this university and to talk to you this morning to start off the 2-day event for faculty development, it's called, on what she describes as the path to excellence. So I have to collect my thoughts and taking my cue from Srijit's emphasis on the path. Let me begin by saying that excellence as a noun, it derives from a verb which is excel, to excel. And that literally means to do better, to advance, to progress. So it's a functioning, it's a verb. And so the word excellence ought to be always associated with action. And in other words, it's all about karma, which means action, right? And so we have to figure out, how do you approach this action? If we are teaching in a university, we are, expected to function in certain ways. The university itself has aims, a vision. It generally has a mission, and it then has various yardsticks or benchmarks that it would like to attain. These are all the surrounding features of our life. Many universities want to be ranked as, by the international ranking agencies, Times Higher Education, QS ranking. There's a China-based ranking center. So that becomes a kind of a aim of a university, that they should be advancing in their ranking. And that, in a way, is seen as a path to excellence for the institution, advancing on these rankings. And then other benchmarks, you could say we want to be world class. We want to be, what is world class? Oh, something like, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, whatever. These are kinds of, it's very much in currency now as pathways to a certain kind of excellence. But my take on this is going to be somewhat different. These are all there, and we are expected to, contribute towards becoming that. We're all expected to contribute articles in Scopus-listed journals, which are taken into account by the ranking agencies. So the more the faculty publish in a Scopus-listed journal, the more weight it gets, and therefore its ranking might go up. All of these is what we live with. But all of this, in my opinion, misses out what is truly the essence of excellence. And let me explain why I think it misses out what is truly the meaning of excellence. Now let me begin with a kind of an example. Suppose you want a child to learn how to enjoy playing chess, right? Child is not particularly interested, and so you tell the child, I'll give you, a bar of chocolate if you start playing with me. And the child is interested in the chocolate, but because the only way to get that bar of chocolate is to sit with this old man and try to play a game of chess, the child may agree. And then over time what happens is that you tell the child, now if you win, I'm going to play in a way that will let you, not too difficult for you because you're still learning. But if you win a game, I'll give you, 2 bars of chocolate. It's an incentive. And then the child decides, there's some way by which I should beat this old man. And it's very likely the child will figure out very quickly how to cheat at the game, right? And to get the 2 bars of chocolate by cheating, right? Now, the point of my story here is that there are 2 things happening here. One is that the child is playing the game for the sake of something external to the game itself. That is the prize, right? You start with that. You start with, if this university is going to give me an incentive of 50,000 rupees for publishing a Scopus-listed article, or 100,000 rupees, that's my aim. I want to get that 100,000 rupees. So I'll figure out which journals are easy to publish. Maybe I'll talk to the editors of those journals. I'll do whatever, and I'll get my article out and I'll get the 100,000 rupees. You're motivated by the 100,000 rupees, just as the child starts playing chess because it's motivated by the bar of chocolate, right? But over time, what might happen to the child is that the child would begin to enjoy the game of chess, right? Intrinsically, because it is that kind of a game where you're using your mind, you're strategizing, you're trying to think in terms of steps ahead and so on. And at that point, that child is going to understand what I might call an internal standard of excellence. So I want to make this crucial distinction between what is an internal standard of excellence in the practice of playing chess or playing a game, and the external one, which is the external reward. So really, excellence strictly is not about the external reward, because the external reward is there. So, but then, in order to be able to enjoy the game of chess for its own sake, for its intrinsic value, is what excellence, or the pursuit of excellence, really ought to be. So when you know nowadays with all the different kinds of T20 and so on, and players being purchased at high price, there's a lot of money in the game. But the great players of cricket are those who would play the game for the sake of the game, or soccer, you can make a lot of money, is that. So the best players, there were in the days when there was no external reward, a great cricketer like Maharaja Ranjit Singh, playing in Cambridge, invented beautiful strokes that to this day are appreciated by cricketers. The leg lance and the late cut are strokes that he wove a magic. He was described by one commentator as witnessing oriental magic when Ranjit Singh ji was on the crease batting. No, he didn't do it for the sake of some external good. He did it because intrinsic to the game is a kind of quest for perfection in what you do. So I think this is very central to our work, that is to understand that when you teach a class and your students have actually their faces light up and they've understood what you want them to understand, that's the reward. Whether you're going to be in your performance appraisal, the student is going to give you a high rating or a low rating is not the point. The point is that that student has learnt and you have made a connect with the student, and that's the satisfaction in itself. So we all have to pursue excellence in that way. When Srijit was talking about it, I was reminded of the Constitution of the United States, which talks about the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And he was really talking about the happiness of pursuit. But the happiness of pursuit, I think, in the American context is, somewhat different. It's about, men trying to get women interested in them. That's a kind of pursuit. But what I mean is that if you think of teaching, you have the term. So in medicine, for instance, it's a noble profession. Law is a noble profession. In these professions, you call them a law practice. You say a medical practice, right? So you use the word practice for these noble professions. We haven't quite called teaching a practice, but it has all the elements that come to it. So in law and in medicine, you have something called the Hippocratic Oath, which boils down to saying that your primary objective of your practice is to heal people. And if someone is in need and then life needs to be saved, you're not going to think of whether the person has insurance, whether the payment would be made. You ought to first and foremost attend to that person and try to save that person's life. That's the essence of the Hippocratic Oath. So there's an ethical obligation that comes with it. See, likewise in the practice of law, you have to defend a client who comes to you and says, please be my representative, appear for me on the case. Now you cannot be sitting in judgment saying, I think you're really guilty, but I'm not going to, You got to say, I'll do my best for you. And you got to keep your relationships, the conversations you have with your client confidential. You don't go around telling the world what the client might tell you. The client might well lie to you, that's very possible. But nonetheless, there's an obligation of confidentiality. So these are ethical obligations that go with the practice. So then we have to ask ourselves, if we are going to be teachers, what would be our ethical obligations that correspond to the obligations that you have in the noble professions of medicine and law? And then you begin to understand what it is that you need to be doing. So your first obligation is, and the professor used the word pedagogy, it's a pedagogical obligation to transmit knowledge, to stoke curiosity and interest in students, and primarily to enable students to learn how to learn. Because that is the essence of it. Otherwise, it's not a question of knowing facts and, the 3 battles of Panipat and which years they took place in and so on. Now you can look it up. You don't have to carry it in your head. So that kind of, expecting students to memorize facts and figures and regurgitate them in an examination is the wrong thing to do. That's not what true pedagogy is all about. It's all about stoking an interest in the student to get to be curious. Now, in all of this, in the accomplishment of these practices, if you like, you need to cultivate certain virtues in order to realize them properly. So, unfortunately, in the world we now live in, there's very little attention that's paid to these classical virtues. You get some of it, but when Krishna is talking to Arjuna, trying to persuade him, Arjuna is a very good utilitarian. He's telling Krishna, why should I fight? Because the consequence of this war is going to be death and destruction and sadness all around, people killed. And it's not worth it. Why should I fight? And, why should I fight against my cousins, my teachers? I'll not do it. Whereas Krishna then has to try to persuade him, he doesn't quite persuade him by reason and logic. The way he persuades him is by showing his Trivikrama features, the absolute Brahman, the divinity, the infinite, encompassing all of the universe, and shock and awe is what persuades Arjuna to thinking that he must do his duty as a Kshatriya and therefore must fight. But the essence of the lesson there is that you act not because you want some consequence of the action. You act because intrinsically that action has merit and is worth doing. That's the point, right? So that's a key lesson. Nishkama karma is a key teaching in the Gita, which pertains to what I'm talking about, the pursuit of an internal excellence. And you then set internal standards of excellence, right? Because you may be a novice cricketer, but then you begin and then you set standards of excellence for yourself. That is, I must do better next year than I've done this year. If you're playing chess, I must try and win more tournaments later on than I've been able to do in the past. So you're benchmarking yourself against yourself, right? So that is very important for us in our teaching. We have to try and see what can we do the next time we face a class that's going to be a little more exciting, interesting to the student, interesting to ourselves, more enjoyable, more playful than it was previously. So it's that quest that's important. Now, the other point I want to make, though, is that all these practices, if you like, chess, cricket, these are 2 games I've used to illustrate my point, they all have institutions. Teaching has an institution, the university. Now, institutions have a capacity to become corrupt. We know that the Cricket Control Board of India is corrupt. The Chess Federation, the International Chess Federation could be corrupt. The Wrestling Federation of India is corrupt. But these institutions are needed to foster the practice, right? Without the institution, the practice cannot be sustained, but the institution poses a risk of corrupting. And so how do you safeguard yourself against that? There is always an element of, oh, well, let us take more and more students because they will pay fees, regardless of whether they are qualified and have the prerequisites to study a particular course. Because the moment the student joins, the student pays fees, then the institution has a revenue. Now that's the corrupting element, right? So if we are involved in, the university, we need some virtues. One of them is courage. Now, that the kind of a extreme of courage is recklessness. So you have to have the golden mean there. Figure out, it will take some courage to stand up and say, my dean for admissions is sitting here, to say, sorry, just because the student is willing to pay a high fee and join an expensive course, we are not going to admit this student because the student will not have the capability to complete the course, and it's an injustice to the student to put that student through what would end up being a very painful process for the student. The student won't enjoy learning. It takes some courage because on the part of the revenue and the administration of the university, oh well, why not? And you can be told, oh well, you know what? You should find a student brick, and your job is to turn that student into marble, right? So to a certain extent you could do that. You could find a student who's somewhat mediocre, and then you can turn that student into somebody who is very brilliant and good because of the value of your teaching, but it can't happen in all cases. So institutions, we must remember, are oriented to an external good. They are thinking of outcomes, they're thinking of impact, they're thinking of, will we be number one law school in the world, in India, will we be this and that. Those are its objectives, but they are all external, right? They don't matter to your internal standards of excellence. So without us, members of a profession, being committed to internal standards of excellence where we enjoy doing what we do, and we do it for the sake of that enjoyment. Of course, if there are external enjoyments, you get more revenue, you probably get higher salaries, you'll probably get more incentives for publication in research journals, and then you can buy yourself nice holidays and live the good life, all that, but they're all external. They don't really matter to the kind of excellence that we ought to pursue, which is internal. And in order to sustain that internal excellence, we need to cultivate some virtues. Among them, I would say, is courage. To be able to speak up and say, look, this will not help the students. This will not help the teaching community. We can't do it in this way. That takes courage. Now, not everybody need to be, in that sense, standing up and, being what the authorities might call a rabble-rouser. You could do it quietly. Some of us may not do it at all, but that doesn't, but then that person will have to admit to herself or himself in their conscience that they are being cowards. Right? So the virtue of courage is important. A commitment to truth is important. Truthfulness is very important in this profession because very often it's easy, and nowadays the world is full of false information. The social media has any kinds of claims being made. It's very difficult to sift what is actually the case from what is made up. There's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of hype, exaggeration, and so on. And one of the tasks that we have as teachers is to enable our students to develop a sense of practical judgment, which is to be able to, an intuitive ability to differentiate something that is hyped up and is hyperbole and is exaggerated or downright lies, and to be able to tell what is actually the case, what is the truth. So a commitment to that kind of truth-seeking is essential to foster what I would call the internal standards of excellence. And it's also important, I think, to have a sense of justice. So these are the virtues that we need to cultivate. Justice is important because, very often we are evaluating students, we are human beings. You've been annoyed by some student who's, not behaved politely in class. Over time you don't like that student, and when you're grading that student, this thought comes into mind. Now this is a kind of a terrible student. I mean, he had to be put in his place, right? But that's not justice. You have to judge the student by the quality of that student's work, not by your attitudes or emotions with respect to the student. It equally work the other way. You might find somebody very attractive and charmed by that student, and you might think, I have to please the student, I'm her teacher, so let me give high grades. Then you would be doing an injustice to yourself and an injustice to that student. So that's why I emphasize a sense of justice in our dealings with people is very important, because these things happen. It's not, I'm not making it up. We are all people with, foibles. It was famously said by Immanuel Kant about human beings that out of this crooked timber, nothing straight can ever be made. So we must admit that we are vulnerable, we have foibles, but it's important to be conscious of it. So the moment you know that, so when you come back to that child who's learning chess, when that child starts cheating in order to get something else, that child would be cheating itself. It's not cheating the opponent, right? You get to that point. So if we are not fair in how we evaluate students in our, and we think that we are influenced by some factor, it could be ideological. I mean, nowadays, I think there's a real risk, because of the state of politics, of being ideologically swayed, right? We've witnessed this happening in anyone who stands up and supports Palestine in an American university campus can be immediately labeled as anti-Semite. It may have nothing to do with Zionism and anti-Semite at all. You just think that the poor Palestinian people have suffered and have been the victims of an injustice over a long period of time, begin with the colonial power and the Balfour Declaration, which created the state of Israel. From that time onwards, they have been victims of injustice. So you may want to speak up for them because you're witnessing every day their children being killed and so on, but then you're likely to be accused, you're likely to be summoned by, as happened with the president of Harvard and the president of Pennsylvania, to answer for this. What would you do? And the answer she gave correctly was, it depends on the context, whether something is actually anti-Semite or not. But that wasn't good enough, right? So these are all the corrupting influences of institutions, I'm saying, right? But the president of Harvard and the president of Pennsylvania had the courage to quit, holding up to an internal standard of excellence. Now that's what I mean. This means that at some points we may have to make some sacrifices. Because if you're not willing to make any sacrifice, not willing to put yourself in any difficulty, and you want to just flow with the wind, and take it easy, then you're not really living up to a pursuit of excellence. You are then, mediocre. So, and mediocrity is a very comfortable position to be in. I remember when I was in Jubilee Hall as a student in Delhi University, the big man, Biju Patnaik, came to give a talk. enormous, tall personality, you had the Kalinga Airlines and so on. So I remember what he said. I mean, I think if that is said now in campuses that ban, alcohol and tobacco and so on, Biju Patnaik would be in trouble. What he said was this: if you drink in excess. If you fly fast, but do not live a life of sedate mediocrity. Right? So I remember this line: living a life of sedate mediocrity is so easy, right? But you got to push yourself. So the pursuit of excellence is really that. It's not really, and you're benchmarking yourself. There's no need to benchmark, anybody else. But when you benchmark yourself, you got to remember that we are part of a great tradition of teaching. Is a noble profession. We are part of a tradition. So standards have been set by others. So you're benchmarking yourself, saying, I will do better next month or next year than I did this year. But you also have standards to look up to. What did the great teacher Socrates do? How did he teach? Right, that's a standard. So when he mentioned the Socratic method, which is really to get the student to ask the questions and have a dialogue, those kinds of methods, we have set standards, right? I remember there's a joke in Cambridge about a tourist coming to ask the gardener in King's College, how is it that this, and the gardener says, well, you mow the grass, and you mow the grass, and you mow the grass, and you do it for some 800 years, and it'll be like this, right? So you see, there's a tradition there. And remembering that history, remembering the greats in that tradition, remembering Bhupen Hazarika, as this university does, is remembering who are the people who have achieved great strides, excellence. And they are standard bearers for us. They should inspire us, right? So I'd say that, and they've, one of my favorite poets is Longfellow. And I remember I learned it as a schoolboy, right? Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time that somebody else will follow. So this sense of belonging to a tradition, this sense of looking up to exemplars of excellence in that tradition, or say of teaching, is important. And that will be a guide to us as to how to do better and so on. So I'd say that therefore, cultivating some virtues, having courage. Patience is another virtue that teachers need. Some student would be slow in learning, and you can get impatient with that student. But it's important to cultivate the virtue of patience. But then you ought to know patience for what? Just sitting there and waiting for apparently nothing to happen that's not the virtue of patience. You should know patient to get what, right? For purpose. So I'd end my remarks on excellence with the importance of having what the Greeks called, in the Iliad, arete is the word used for both virtue and excellence. It has both the meanings. Virtue and excellence are interlinked, as I've been trying to explain. So we've got to know what it is. What is the telos? What is the objective, right? So when you need to know that, and in that sense, it's about our entire life. So it is not simply that you do excellent work this year and the next year you slack off and you say no, I was distracted, I had family commitments and so on, so I didn't bother with my teaching properly, or didn't undertake any research. That's not the point of it. The point is that you've set yourself a purpose. And the purpose really is a fulfilled life. The Greeks had the saying that you don't judge a person as being good or bad or brave or cowardly until the person is dead. At the end of the life, at the end of a narrative, which is what life is, you need to say, I led an examined life and I'm fulfilled or satisfied or contented with what I've been able to accomplish in my life. Right? That is the aim. Not that I got promoted, accelerated promotion, double promotion, became a professor, became a national fellow, got invited to Harvard to give a series of lectures and so on. All those are external goods. They're not the point. The point is that for ourselves, we have to say our life is a narrative, and in the course of living out our life, this is what we will pursue. That is an excellence in what we do, a sense of, so whether it is painting or playing a game or teaching, whatever it is that you do, intrinsic to it is a certain joy and enjoyment in doing it. And that is what we are to be seeking. So I would say that therefore when you also have to deal with external pressures. You have to deal with expectations of, the university which wants higher rankings and more publications and so on. Because you see, all of these are corrupting elements, I would say that. We know about all the predatory journals, the UGC has a whole list of them. The moment you incentivize publications, you get predatory journals, you get dubious journals. Nature has had more redactions of articles that they originally thought was of high quality research, which turned out to be false, right? All of this is corruption, right? And we need to be on guard against that and avoid trying to do that, and for that, cultivate these virtues of courage, truthfulness, honesty, and so on. And therefore, it's linked to the term excel or excellence is the cultivation of virtues. This is difficult because in the age that we are now living in, it's a very individualistic age. Every individual wants to get better than the other individual. So what we end up doing in our teaching is trying to make students competitive, right? Do better than the next student, get the first rank. And we do give them medals, first rank holder, second rank holder. This is wrong, in my opinion, because this encouraging a sense of individualism and competitiveness diminishes the other regarding capacity in that student to care about others. That is very important. So an educated person must be a person who says, my purpose in life is to make my community, my city, my country, and the world a better place. What can I do to do that? What can I do for my fellow human beings? How can I help them? That should be the motivation. Not that I can beat everybody else, I will become the CEO by stamping over the heads of other people and sit on top. That is corrupting. And that's not pursuit of excellence. That pursuit of excellence is about caring for others. So when these virtues were discussed in Aristotle or Socrates or in the Bhagavad Gita, they are all about what do you do for the good of the community. So it's not about the good of the individual, right? It's not about whether your individual self and your achievements matter. You have to be a member of a flourishing community. And that sense of community, fellow feeling is to be cultivated. Now we live in times where, people are living in gated communities. If there is no electricity supply in the city, doesn't matter. They have their own generators. If there's no clean water supplied to citizens. Doesn't matter, they can set up their own water plant and RO facilities, and they don't care about how everybody else lives. Now this is dangerous because you need to be living in a community where you interact with others, you care about others, and we must educate our students to become that. If we continue this competitive line and because in any job in the real world, you need other people. You need to work with other people. A competitive instinct will disqualify you from doing well in the job. A cooperative instinct, an instinct of being able to work with other people, is what will enable you to excel in that job. And that's what we have an obligation to teach. And that is all the more difficult because of the kind of society we are now living in. It's an individualized society. The bonds of community are weaker than they were. Now, of course, it is two-sided. A family is a source of protection, affection, love, but a family can also be oppressive. Families can be oppressive. Families can say you cannot marry outside your gotra, you cannot you have to marry somebody outside your gotra, and so on, right? Families can be oppressive, and therefore a certain sense of liberation is needed for the individual, but then that shouldn't be taken to the kind of extreme where all that matters is myself and my individual well-being. And the sense of bonding with others is very important. And how are we to get this across? It doesn't matter whether you're teaching biology or engineering in the classroom. This cultivation of these virtues, education is what a student becomes, not what the student is carrying in their head and able to do. It is what kind of person has your student become upon graduation. That is your telos. That is the aim. If that is the aim and you work to cultivating internal standards of excellence, not do it because of external incentives, then like that child who did not want to play chess, was bribed to play chess and began to appreciate the beauty of the game and to then play the game for the sheer beauty of it, that's what we want our students to become. So I'd stop there and thank you very much.
A very good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this conversation on the path to excellence. Thank you, Professor Sudarshan, for this truly, truly fascinating and inspiring keynote and for setting the tone for the conversations that we are going to have now. It is always such a pleasure to listen to you, and we get inspired every day. We are your colleagues and we have the opportunity to listen to you often, because every time it is something that we learn when we get inspired by your talk. So thank you very much for that. I just want to set a little bit of context on what we are going to do for the next today and tomorrow. Professor Sudarshan spoke about, and my colleague Professor Srijit spoke about excellence, and we also spoke about why we decided to title this two-day conversation as Path to Excellence. Professor Sudarshan spoke about the internal standards of excellence as opposed to the external standards of excellence, and that perhaps there is no one way of defining what excellence is. And we want to talk about how to pursue excellence. But this journey of pursuing excellence, and whatever those internal and external standards may be, could be a lonely one. It is difficult to understand what kind of tools that we need in order to be able to pursue that excellence. I want to tell you a story very briefly, and pardon me if you've already heard this story. But there were two woodcutters, and one day they decided to get into a competition, and they said, let's see who gets, by the end of the day, manages to cut more wood from the forest. So they both go into the forest, and they say, we'll start at 10 a.m., we'll finish at 5 p.m., and let's see who gets more wood. And they start, felling woods in the forest. And the woodcutter A hears that woodcutter B stopped felling the trees after 1 hour. So A is like, oh, B is tired. Let me power through and I'll keep doing, I'll keep cutting more wood and I'll have more wood by the end of the day. So he keeps cutting, and then after some time B resumes, he can hear. And it goes on, every 1 hour B stops and A powers through, and A doesn't stop at all, doesn't take a lunch break, keeps going, and finishes at 5 o'clock. And then they come with their collection of wood, and to A's surprise, B has much more wood than A does. And A was like, but I heard you stopped every 1 hour for at least 10-15 minutes. I powered through, I did not take a break. And it's not like you are more powerful than I am, we are both similarly built. How do you have more woods than I have? What were you doing when you're taking the break? So woodcutter B said, I was sharpening the axe. So in our pursuit of excellence and in our pursuit of that end goal of amassing something, whatever that idea of excellence may be, we forget to often sharpen our tools. While we understand that we need to get into the room, we want to inspire our students, we want to invoke curiosity, we want to have the best curriculum, we want to be able to engage in research for the joy of engaging in research. But how to do that? What tools do we have at our disposal to be able to do that? To be able to be the best teacher, I have to have understanding about pedagogy. You know, we often often hear this thing, he or she is a born teacher, right? And perhaps some are, but some can learn to be, right? We can learn to be better at what we do. Right? We may want to do research for the institutional requirements, or we may engage in research for the joys of doing research, but how to do it in the best possible way, right? That is the thought behind this workshop. This workshop, which we have titled as Path to Excellence, aims to talk with you, to deliberate with you, to talk to you about our experiences, to hear from you about your experiences, and find a set of tools, both for designing our curriculums, to think about pedagogy in new and imaginative ways, to be able to inspire our students, but in the process also to be able to inspire ourselves. But we need a set of tools, a set of skills to be able to do that. So the Path to Excellence workshop in these 2 days will try to think about new and imaginative ways in which we can think about bettering ourselves, equipping ourselves with the right kind of tools so that we can pursue excellence, both internal and external. And I'm very grateful to Professor Alok Buragohai for coordinating with us, to all of you who have come to have these deliberations with you. The thought behind OP Jindal Global University and Royal Global University coming together for this institutional mentorship is actually fits into this larger idea of path to excellence. We feel that as a university, JGU in the past 15 years of its existence has been able to achieve certain standards of excellence, the footprints, as Professor Sudarshan would say, on the sand. And we want to see that how we can work together with RGU, how we can collaborate, learn from each other's experience, and perhaps go together, because path to excellence is not a journey that you take alone, it's a collaborative journey, right? You excel together. So the idea of this mentorship is to be able to come together, to share our expertise, our resources, to guide each other wherever we can, and walk together on this path to excellence. So with that, I would like to say that we are concluding the opening session with the keynote address and the conversation. We have a panel discussion coming up, and we want the panel discussion and all conversations that we have going forward to be interactive. So please, let's talk to each other and figure out a path together. Thank you very much. I look forward to the deliberations of the next 2 days.
Could we start?
Yes, please.
Okay, great honor to invite all of you to a panel with the theme Dialogic Practices. And I have with me 4 distinguished panelists. By way of formality, let me introduce them. We have with us Professor Sudarshan, Professor R. Sudarshan, Distinguished Professor and Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. Professor Indranath Gupta, Professor of Law and Dean of Office of Data Innovation. we have Professor Upasana Mahanta, Professor of Political Science in Jindal Global Law School, and also the Dean of Admissions and Outreach, and Professor Olok Burogowain, Professor and Chairman Academic in Royal Global University. I'll briefly speak about dialogic practices by way of setting a context, and then I'll request all the panelists to reflect on the theme broadly, and then I'll have a few particular questions to them, rather focused questions to them, and then we'll open the floor for audience to speak to the panelists. Know that dialogue is the pedagogy of the oppressed, if we take Paulo Freire seriously. In order to break that age-old banking concept of education whereby the teachers come and deposit knowledge in the minds of the students, they wanted the self of the students to speak and discover themselves in the otherness which the professor would be projecting in the class. So while dialogue is a pedagogy of the oppressed, we would like to conceive dialogue in a little bit broader way. I've identified three of my popular dialogues. The third one I added after listening to Professor Sudarshan's illustration on the game of chess. But the first one, my most, the dearest dialogue, or the dialogue which is closest to my heart, is the dialogue that happened between Plato and Thrasymachus, or rather Socrates and Thrasymachus in the Republic of Plato. Now in this dialogue, one could see that Plato really wanted to develop a transcendental concept of justice. His idea was to create like a mega monster, a meta monster in the form of the idea of the justice. But then comes a brute, Thrasymachus, who asked certain nasty questions to Socrates or Plato, whosoever, which ultimately made Plato to concede that justice is nothing but perfection in your craft. And I think that perfection in your craft very well fits into our broader scheme of things as well, because perfection in the craft is that you keep on perfecting while being on the path to excellence. So in this dialogue, generally Thrasymachus is considered to be a villain, the antagonist, but that's not the case. You would see that Thrasymachus came in as the first note of crude realism here. He told Plato that justice is nothing but the fulfillment of the desires of the powerful, which made Plato to amend his own original proposition and concede to the fact that justice is nothing but a craft in one's own perfection. So had there been no dialogue here between Thrasymachus, especially a less informed Thrasymachus, or probably more pragmatic Thrasymachus, Plato or Socrates would have created a transcendental notion of justice which probably might not have led to any kind of social utility. My second dear dialogue is, or the second favorite dialogue is a dialogue that happens between two individuals in Orhan Pamuk's novel White Castle. Two individuals are talking in a tavern. The conversations go on and on and on. It's quite desultory, not being focused, but yet you could see that both are very comfortable with their respective standpoints. Halfway through the novel, the personalities change. A becomes B, B becomes A, and the subsequent novel is about how you writhe in the pain of being in somebody else's identity. What Orhan Pamuk is trying to convey is that the organic Turkish identity shall not be distorted by way of a European intervention, but yet he has beautifully demonstrated the power of the dialogue. They were not reaching anywhere, but both were absolutely comfortable with their own respective positions. But the moment the dialectic starts and you are forced to get into the identity of the other, it's a kind of an oppressive dialectic which happened. They write in the pain of the alien identities. The third one, when Professor Sudarshan spoke about the game of the chess, I just wrote down my yet another novel I read, which is by the Japanese Nobel laureate Yasunari Kawabata, the master of Go. So here a game of Go, which is of course a glorified slow motion version of chess. Chess itself is slow, but this is a slow motion version of the chess which runs into months and probably years. An orthodox master and a student with a modernist outlook, they're playing the game. The master is unable to understand the student's improvisations, the student's imaginations, the student's strategic approach to the game, because the master is still adhering to his orthodoxy, and he's finding a pleasure in being adherent to his own orthodoxies. The master's identity starts to get troubled by this because the student is going ahead. The problem is not about student winning, but the manner he has chosen to win the game, very outcome oriented. But the master is deriving pleasure in each moment, which also reminds me, you gave the analogy of cricket. The test cricket, well, people are quite eager to know who won the test match. Well, you are literally killing the joy of the test match. A test match should go into 5 days. 700 without loss, and the other team taking another 900 without loss. It's not all about the outcome, but the test match is about the endurance, how a batsman or how a bowler delivers each ball over 5 days, how the batsman endures throughout the day. This is the beauty of the cricket. So, of course, cricket I just mentioned, it has nothing to do with dialogue. So these three dialogues, if you look at that, the Plato Thrasymachus or the Socrates Thrasymachus, in the dialogue in the White Castle and the dialogue in the Master of the Go, it's not outcome matters, but more than that, dialogue is a practice. Dialogue is a practice of ethics. Dialogue is a practice of knowledge building, which ultimately leads to larger knowledge production. So, in dialogue, you also don't need to be equals. You can have dialogue with someone who's better informed than you, who had a better lived experience under their belt than the other one in the dialogue. And this is the classic case of Thrasymachus and Plato, is that Thrasymachus comes as a doubting Tom here, not as someone as equally informed as Socrates. So it's fine to be in a dialogue, but of course, so dialogue can also be non-hierarchical. It need not be, dialogue can also be hierarchical at times, and yet you can yield the benefit of a dialogue. Another interesting thing about the dialogue is that you need to be extremely cautious, because what you think as a comfortable position being thrown at you could be a trap. Dialogue is full of trap, especially you know that in the Tarka tradition in ancient India, those in dialogue, they will make you agree to a false proposition, and then they will debase you by saying that, well, look, I made you to agree to a false proposition. So in a dialogue, before conceding, we need to be conscious that it's not really a trap. You need to be extremely wary when you participate in a dialogue. At the same time, being open-minded about the dialogue. So I'll just mention a couple of points before I get to the distinguished panelists. So dialogue is not all about taking positions. Well, you can have positions as well, but occasionally textbook definition of dialogue is that it's like a mutual inquiry of the truth. But then more than that, dialogue is also a participation. Dialogue is also about asserting one's position. Dialogue is also about fine-tuning one's position and probably getting that falsified or probably getting that proven right. But most importantly, there is a beautiful art in dialogue. It's about building sequential logic. Maybe by really heeding to the other, by conceding to a certain position, you are actually setting, you're setting a logic there, a sequential logic. So that's why syllogisms and such techniques are so popular within the dialogue. But as I've said, one needs to be wary, because each proposition could be a trap. We should also sometimes be, in order to make a student understand things in the classrooms, sometimes wrong propositions should be thrown at them to make them understand that this is how we fall trap to fallacies. And lastly, definitely, as I said, it builds knowledge, but most importantly, dialogue it's an informative process. Now, dialogue need not be open either. You can always participate in dialogue in silence. Being an observer to something. So I have a colleague who goes to the class and forges all false identities before even the class begins. I'm a Marxist, I'm a feminist. It gives all kinds of identities, true or false. But then the beauty of this kind of a proposition, or this kind of a forging identity, is that even a silent participant, a silent student in the class who's not chirpy or who's not a gunner, is also participating in this dialogue, because everything which she says is being perceived with a critical mind, because this is a feminist proposition. This is a Marxist proposition, not like an objective truth or objective truth propositions coming from them. So this is the beauty of the dialogue. We'll go a little deeper into this, but first of all, I've just submitted my broader, which could be naive to understanding of dialogue, but first of all, I'll invite each panelist to reflect on dialogues, because we all have our own viewpoints of dialogues. We participate in dialogues in different manner. If we look at Amartya Sen's argumentative Indian, he even says that the presence of a very architecture in the Indian landscape prompts us to engage in a dialogue. It prompts a cultural dialogue between two individuals, between two sensibilities. So dialogue can happen at multiple levels. So I'll invite all panelists. We'll go in the order in which you are sitting.
Yeah, sure.
So that it becomes non-hierarchical. So I'll invite Professor Indranath Gupta first of all to have his reflections, and then I'll have some focused questions to each one of them. Yes.
It's an honor to be a part of this August gathering. I was thinking, how would I represent dialogue? And this morning an exam came to my mind, which I have been sort of sharing with my students for a very long time. And it comes from my fairly long stint with the discipline of science. And it is the following. Two parallel lines meeting at infinity. If you think of it, right, It's a fallacy. If you're looking for an absolute answer, it'd be false. However, if you come to think of it, why do we say two parallel lines can meet at infinity? Parallel lines, because of its the feature of parallel lines, should be parallel to each other, which can be construed as two different views, going parallel, running parallel, mutually coexisting. Do they ever meet? That reminds me of what Srijit was saying, that dialogue need not give you an absolute answer. But at times, they can meet at infinity, if that is ever the fact. So, infinity is infinite space. And in that space, anything is possible. So dialogue, in fact, brings about that space where even two parallel lines can meet. If you come to think of it, when two parallel lines would meet, essentially, the distance between such lines would cease to exist. Which means the difference of opinions, the perspectives, the divergent views may cease to exist at some point of time once they have ran parallel to each other. So much so that with each decreasing space, the lines would come closer to each other, so much so that they become one single line and then they have met at infinity. So this would be my opening remarks, Srijit.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love this expression, voyage to infinity. Never thought that, with the hope that someday we'll meet and again to be separated. Well, that's how the knowledge building happens. That you meet and you go away again, you come back. I'll pass on the microphone. Sir.
No, you use this one.
Okay.
I just love this beautiful expression, voyage to infinity.
Okay.
Over to you, Professor Sudarshan.
We in my earlier talk, I placed a lot of emphasis on truthfulness. But, truth itself it's not falsehood, it's not lies, but it's difficult to pinpoint and say what is the truth. In the Gospel, there's a famous saying attributed to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, at the trial of Jesus Christ, who was accused of heresy by the Jews. And Pontius Pilate says, what is the truth? And he did not wait for an answer. And so when you think about it, one of the ways of accessing a truth is dialogue. So let me kind of explain this. How many of you are lawyers? Any lawyers here? Okay, so in a courtroom, what the judge is trying to do is to arrive at the truth. What did actually happen, right? Now, you might call that a kind of microscopic truth. You want to find out what happened on that particular date when some crime was committed, what actually happened. And you establish this through evidence and circumstantial evidence and testimonies and so on. That's one kind of truth. You do get at it, but that's in a way very microscopic. It is focused on something very narrow. And but there's another kind of truth of which the greatest exemplar is Mahatma Gandhi. The title of his autobiography is My Experiments with Truth. Now, this is a kind of experiential truth. You know this to be the case because you lived through it. You've experienced it. And therefore, it must be so. It's in Hindu philosophy, you have something called the pramana, and which is epistemology, the way of knowing things, and the prameya, the object about which you know something. So, but in the case of a person living through life, you reach certain things that you know to be the truth. And for Gandhi, that was important because, he wanted satyagraha, which is a kind of grasping the truth, getting at it. That's very important. But then, one of the most impressive things that's happened after apartheid ended in South Africa was thanks to Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, who got the Nobel Prize for Peace, they created something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this is important because the white regime, the apartheid regime, had committed untold atrocities on members of the African National Congress, to whom Mandela and Tutu belonged. And they felt that, in order to have otherwise you can carry this acrimony, the blacks may want to take revenge against the whites for the past wrongs. How can you end this? So they felt that there needed to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and to have those who committed atrocities against the members of the African National Congress would come, they'd be sitting in the same room and have a dialogue. So in the process, there's of course who did what, who was appointed, but in the process, something emerged that you might call a dialogic truth. You see, which is how you perceive the reality to be, right? So one incident there was, one of the members of the ANC was a white man called Justice Albie Sachs. He became one of the judges of the Constitutional Court in South Africa. When he was in the ANC, he was in exile in Mozambique because the white regime wanted to arrest him. Then they sent the secret police to plant a bomb in his car. So the moment he opened the car door, the bomb went off and he lost his right arm. It just blasted out of his body. And subsequently, when he's a judge in the Constitutional Court in South Africa, in Johannesburg, somebody comes to meet him and says, I want to meet the judge. And so this white man comes into his office and he says, Judge, I want you to know that I am the secret police officer who planted the bomb in your car. And Albie Sachs says, I'm very sorry, I can't shake you by the hand using my right hand, right? Now, you see, there is something there that happens. So I think this is very important because what we take to be the truth, once you're in dialogue, engaging with somebody, with treating them with kind of equal respect, because it's not that one is, you get at something, right, which is something that wasn't there before. You create a reality, you create a truth. So this is the capacity that dialogue has, which is to create a special kind of truth to which both sides in the dialogue can become adherents. And this must be a quest. Thank you.
I think it's extremely important to think about Gandhi when we speak about dialogues, because Gandhi lived a life in pursuit of excellence, and that excellence he defined as truth. And there was a dialogue, constant dialogue between what he called as truth and untruth, the satya and the asatya. And also the desire about which I mentioned while introducing the concept note, that there is an irresistible desire, the agraha, to attain that truth. And Gandhi used his life all through in this dialogue. It was a constant dialogue between the mind and the body. He was all the time into a kind of an apophatic, deductive denial of his own body by saying that this is not me, not this, not this, not this, not this. Well, of course, he never tried to, probably when he lost the life, it might have been a negation of the body. But even then, he trivialized the body and let the soul shine over that. So Gandhi, of course, demonstrated with his life what does it mean to live in dialogue. So over to you, Professor Burrow Govind, to your broader reflections on the concept of dialogue.
I'll continue with what Professor Sudarshan just mentioned about the dialogue, arriving at the truth. And similarly, I think on the same line, Indra also told, meeting of the two parallel lines, and the convergence is the point of truth, the realization of the point of truth. Now let us bring the dialogue to the classroom. About is this, you can have a dialogue in silence, as you said. One can have a dialogue in silence. If we go to Socratic pedagogies, Socrates very famously said, never taught anyone anything. I have never taught anyone anything. I only made my disciples to think, to look and to think. And what is this thought process? Why is this thought process? That thought process, implicit in the thought process, is the dialogue that one has on the observed phenomenon or the realities. And through that dialogue with oneself, the student, the disciple, and we call this as critical thinking, observation, or whatever. But that is a dialogue to me. And ultimately it leads to the realization of the reality, and that is the truth. So what I mean to say is this, that as Socratic pedagogy fundamentally says that you think, and that thought process to me is a process leading to a dialogue in silence. And what you have said, it could be between the body and the mind, body and the soul. But that kind of thought process has to be excited, stimulated amongst the students. I think that is very important. Rather than bombarding them with information, knowledge, theories, principles, processes, protocols, we should be able to make them think, make them thoughtful, and that is a part of the dialogic process.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Buragovin. I would also reflect 2 seconds on Socratic method. You mentioned about Socratic method. Socrates is somebody who taught that questions are the answers. Answers are only the means to ask questions. So questions are bigger in the larger scheme of things. It's not the answers. And also you talk about this perpetual conflict between the self and the other. Self wants to improve, but what the self is seeing is an other. Now the self is feeling that it will get assimilated to the other. Again, the self is revealing itself as like an extimate other. And this extimateness, or the very feeling of extimate, that's actually creating the self again to go back to the other. So this you have alluded to that perpetual conflict between self and the other. Upasana, I'll move to you now.
Thank you.
On dialogues at large.
But the difficulty of being the last one to speak is that everything that one wanted to say has already been said. So I want to come to the idea of dialogue from another sort of perspective. That dialogue is not merely an intellectual exercise or an academic exercise. Dialogue is not merely an academic exercise, or it is not an intellectual exercise, right? We do dialogue on an everyday basis. Both inside and outside the classroom, or inside and outside the framework of, say, intellectual pursuits. So, for example, you would have dialogue with your spouse, you will have dialogue with your children, you will have dialogue with neighbors, with friends, and others. So there is a conversation and dialogue that is happening in every context. What stands out to me in the context of dialogue, and when I was reading Plato's Republic for the first time, it was not only the dialogic process where one is trying to seek truth and answers through asking questions, but it is also the power of listening. I think what stood out to me the most in the context of dialogue is that you also have to listen to the other, right? So for me, at the heart of dialogue lies the power, the capacity, and the willingness to listen. Because if you're not listening, you're not actually engaging in dialogue. The parallel lines that Professor Indra spoke about, which one hopes that would meet in infinity in a sense of truth, would not meet if there is not a willingness to meet. So you cannot initiate a dialogue from a position of already arriving at a truth, because then you're not willing to listen to the other and engage in a conversation about arrive at the truth that may not be known to you at the present. How do we think about it in the context of the classroom? I wanted to share this incident. Not anymore, but used to teach this political science course in the law school, and we had a section on power and feminism, and we were having a conversation around this in the classroom, and we were talking about the gender pay gap, and we were having this conversation, and I remember one student said in the process of the conversation and dialogue that we were having in the classroom, said, ma'am, and it's a first or second year law student, said, I would be very uncomfortable if my wife earns more than me. And then there were some, sniggers in the classroom. some girls are looking like, oh. And I took a moment and I said that, okay, it is a difficult thing to say because you want to say things which are politically correct all the time. So for a young student to stand up and say that I will be uncomfortable if my wife earns more than me is a difficult thing to state. in a classroom. So I said, I respect you for having the courage to say what you actually feel. Would you mind engaging and unpacking why you feel like that? And then we had a conversation and around why the student, where that idea of his discomfort with his wife or girlfriend earning more than him comes from. And we engaged with the conversation, others chipped in, we went back and forth, we asked questions. By the end of the class, and I think it was like I had 2 back-to-back classes, so at the end of it, he did not say it in the classroom, but he came and met me outside the classroom. He said, ma'am, I don't think I feel any differently. I don't think I'm still comfortable with the idea, but I understand perhaps I want to rethink it. And for me, that was a good class. So my understanding, to bring in what also Professor Burago has said, that in the context of the classroom, 1, you have to willing to listen. 2, you have to respect the opinions and thoughts and reflections of others. You would have to sort of play down the urge to correct somebody based on the understandings that you have, to respect the process of dialogue, as Professor Sujit said, and as Professor Olak said, it's about asking questions. You're not trying to provide with answers, but yet to keep a larger framework in mind. It's a tough thing to do. How do you keep a larger framework in mind as to what you want the students to ultimately arrive at? It may not be the same thing that you think, but yet, how do you create frameworks where there is an understandings of, some ethical understandings of right and wrong? So one can get lost in the process of because it's not like Socrates, and when Plato wrote about it, was engaging in a pursuit of a conversation where he did not know where those questions were leading to. Right? So this pursuit of truth, which may be unknown, but you have to have a broad understanding as a teacher when you get into the classroom. And that therein comes in that what are the goals that you have in the class of a course or a curriculum? What is the larger pursuit that you are doing, so that the dialogues are also happening, keeping something larger in mind. So there are 2 things. 1 is this dialogue that we do for the larger pursuit of truth, the parallel lines running and hoping that they would meet in infinity. And other is a more structured understanding of that dialogue that we need to do in the context of classrooms, where we have to listen, we have to respect, but we also have to have certain larger goals in mind. That's my initial reflections. Perhaps we can take it.
Thank you very much for that. You spoke about contexts. So context is so important in a dialogue, because again, the dialogue keeps on happening throughout the life, but the context keep on shifting. That means the context could be family, classrooms, public places, even city for that matter. So on city, I would just like to draw your attention to a very interesting dialogue in Elif Shafak's novel 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this strange world. So there is a question being posed by the protagonist to someone who lives in the city of Istanbul, that what is the primary distinction between Istanbul and the rest of the cities in the world? And the character responds that in Istanbul, every time you are reminded of your death, because there are cemeteries at every corner. You see your past. But you go to New York, you go to Washington, you go to Sydney, all the time you are seeing hope, life thriving before you. But in Istanbul, you all the time meet your death. So here you could see that living in a city, you are in a constant dialogue with your surroundings. Yes. Because city is like a mirror. City keeps on speaking. As Professor Vishwanathan once said that those living in the city, they should have a slum in the city. Then only they understood that then only they understand how privileged they are. Slum is the otherness of a city. You rediscover your own fortune in the image of those who live in the slums. So city is a great context where a constant dialogue happens. Now, coming to specific questions, but before that, something for the audience here. I mean, all the speakers spoke with great clarity, great profundity. I've drawn four key words. Probably you could thread a narrative based on this 4. I'm not going to do that. So one is infinity, second, truth, third, silence, and fourth, context. At some point, we'll probably, or maybe during the audience questions, you could try to thread a narrative with that. But now, even though I said that, questions are the finest way
to learn things. Questions are, and answers are means to ask questions. I know that nobody likes a moderator focusing much on the question, so to have focused questions, I'm going to read out the question I have written here so that, we could listen more to the panelists. My first question is to Indra, you. Dialogue in theory, both Oriental theory and Occidental theory, is the discovery of the truth. There is no disagreement to this. But what is the truth, what that is being searched for specifically in the context of a classroom? Well, of course, in the context of a life, it's much clearer. I presume that it is not any transcendental wisdom or grand truth proposition which is being searched for in a class. Students are not there to attain salvation with your one class. But there is something far profound that lies deep within the participants in the dialogue, which perhaps is not any truth per se, but a certain quality within that. Do you agree to this idea? If so, is not the quality that is being searched for through a dialogue one's own ability to respect the other? Well, putting in it, seeing things from that perspective, is not dialogue character building? Pass on the same question to all distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Srijit, for this wonderfully drafted question. In fact, if I can take a cue from Professor Sudarshan's morning's presentation about mowing the lawn, it is more of, there is nothing called, in my opinion, absolute truth. But it is the pursuit of such belief. In a classroom setting, when you are, I don't see myself, and talking about personal experience, I don't see myself as a teacher, but more of a facilitator. When I enter the classroom, I look more like this board, which is there. It doesn't mean that I have not prepared for the class, but it means that I'm willing to listen. So it's not even a dot on the board. I start my class with a dot on the board with the imagination that dot can lead to a circle or a square or a rectangle. And at every step, I'm not looking for that truth, but for that path. So I don't believe that there is an absolute truth. In a classroom context, I do not believe that there is an absolute answer for everything. I don't believe that there is yes and no, but there is a conversation that happens all the time. We do live in the world of MCQs, but each MCQs would also have certain dialogues in them. And therefore it is not just ticking against a particular choice. There are multiple choices, and one perhaps is the closest to what I've been asked, not an absolute answer. Thank you.
At a fundamental level, and I don't know if others would agree, I believe objectivity is a myth. I don't think you can truly ever be objective. Your location, your subjectivities, who you are, the context you come from, all of that impact the way we engage in the classroom or we engage with the text. So the same text or the same material could be engaged differently if you shift the context, right? So I do not believe, and particularly in the classroom when I enter, I do not believe that there is any heightened sense of objectivity that I bring to the class. However, having said that, I also do not believe while you want to engage in dialogue and conversations and arrive at a truth that may or may not be palatable, and arrive at the truth that may or may not be something that you sought to achieve to start with, and while understanding that there is perhaps no inherent objectivity in the text that is being written, or in the way I am engaging with the text, or in the way the conversations in the classroom are happening, I think there has to be, to start with, an acceptance and acknowledgement of the fact that I bring in, as a teacher, my own prejudices and biases and understanding and my location into the classroom. The denial of it is more problematic, and a false pursuit of objectivity or a claim to objectivity I find more problematic. I feel an acknowledgement and acceptance and an honest understanding of it for the class also is important as to where I am coming from, or where my initial pointers have come from, and then you can have an open dialogue. I think dialogue cannot be built on falsehoods. Dialogue cannot be built on false understandings of objectivity. So it has to be very clear from the beginning. That's what I feel.
Wanted to give a context to what Indra mentioned. That's why I came with the sub-question to you. I think it's absolutely okay to leave the class with disagreements, complexities, and confusions.
Absolutely.
But you build the character in that process, the character of agreeing to disagree, the character of honesty, the character of speaking truth to power.
Actually, and I'm sorry if I'm taking more time, and I know other panelists have to talk, but the idea is we have to understand what our classrooms look like. Right? For example, if you go into the classroom of a first-year law student, political science students, history students, sociology students, they have typically come from an Indian education, higher secondary, they've given the class 12 exams, and they have come into the classroom, right? So to be able to even leave them with confusions and questioning, there is a lot of unlearning that one has to do even to be able to ask questions, right? Because a lot of our students do not think, A, that they can ask questions, because often in our school education you were told, my father used to say, if there are 4 types of birds mentioned in the school textbook, the students don't know the name of a 5th one, because you're so regimented in your ways of learning, right? So perhaps there is also a role, before we get into the intellectual exercise of dialogue and seeking truth, and to be able to be left with confusions, you have to prepare the class to be able to okay with confusions, because many in our classroom are not prepared. They get dismayed by confusion. There are many in our classroom who may not be able to deal with confusion. They may want clear-cut answers. Right? They may want to know, okay, then what? What are you leaving us with? So before you reach the point of dialogue and confusion and being able to okay with the discomfort of confusion, I think we as teachers also must prepare our classes to reach that stage. And that does not happen organically. There's work required for that.
Thank you. And Lucas,
It reminds me of something I was involved in when I worked in the United Nations Development Program. We did an exercise. Bangkok was a location for people of the Naga Liberation Front living there in Bangkok. There were representatives of the LTTE at that time, and many representatives of the ethnic groups of Myanmar, all living in Bangkok. So I thought, it'd be a good idea to convene. The UN has convening power to bring them around the table to have a dialogue, right? So we did that. But what we did was we asked each of them to, it was as a sort of simulation, to put themselves in the shoes of their opponent. So the LTT representatives were to be, speaking as if they were representing the government of Sri Lanka, and the Burman, the ethnic groups, the Karen and so on, should be speaking on behalf of the government of Myanmar, and India and the Nagas. So you see, this fostered a dialogue, but what it did was, it first enabled people, for the first time, to actually, because somebody's asked you to do it, otherwise it doesn't come naturally to you to think about what would the other side be thinking, to then put themselves in somebody else's shoes. I mean, it takes some effort and practice, but it works, because then you're able to see viewpoints, and you're able to respect certain positions that you might otherwise not have been able to. So this was a very profound experience for me, just to see this actually happen. Never mind what happened in the actual turn and the events of history. Many of these conflicts are still not resolved. The issue of autonomy for the Tamil people in the northern and eastern province of Sri Lanka is unresolved. That was what the LTT was all about. But nonetheless, it created a sense of respect for another viewpoint. And this is an important feature of a dialogic discourse. You're able to see that the other person has, the opponent has a point of view that's not unreasonable. And we do this, when we get our students to go and represent countries and speak on behalf of those countries in a model United Nations, this is what we are getting them to do. And I think that's a good pedagogical tool to say, put yourself in the shoes of the other person and speak from that point of view. So this actually is important because you see, you also, the other thing, of course, when we teach game theory and so on, this is what you're doing. You've got an n-person game. You're anticipating the strategy of the other person's trying to anticipate your strategy and so on. But very often, where dialogue scores over a lesson in game theory is that the game is continually changing. And it's in a dialogue that you can grasp that dynamic. If you're teaching game theory as a theory, as theoretical things, you miss that out because you think you made you moved pawn to a position on the chessboard and then you lobbed a ball on the other side. That's tennis, right? So then you don't get that. So, but in a dialogue, it evolves. When the nature of the game changes, the context changes, you can still capture it in the course of a dialogue. And that's why it's absolutely essential to cultivate that as a pedagogic practice. First, put yourself in the shoes of your opponent, and then let the dialogue flow in an unfettered way so that dimensions that people have not thought about suddenly crop up, and then people have to deal with it. So that's a very exciting exercise. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you. That's a very profound thinking, and also that prompts me to slightly move into this idea. Of course, the question is sustained. Slightly move into this idea of cognitive justice, because you spoke about respect as the finest quality. But actually, to assess the character of the people in a dialogue, or what kind of character building dialogue leads to, I think what we need is more an external eye, not really studying the phenomenology of the people in dialogue, but what a neutral observer who's standing outside and looking at the people in dialogue. Is the dialogue exuding respect, or is there a respect among the speakers or not? So probably there's also, when we fall into this larger framework of cognitive justice, that shall be the consciousness in the mind of in the minds of the participants in a dialogue, that the respect for the listener, the respect for the speaker. And of course that should come from this consciousness of cognitive justice, that of course if it has to be defined, probably that all knowledges matter. Professor Burra, I'll slightly amend that question to you. Of course, it is the question on character building and dialogue. You are from science discipline. In a science classroom, there is more certainty. Unlike in a social science classroom where there is possibility for subjectivities, possibility for different viewpoints. And also, most of the time, what the subject matter which we have to teach in the class is something which has already been dialogically arrived at in this special minds of the scientists, which may be impervious to less evidence. Say for instance, I don't know what kind of dialogue happened between Stephen Hawking and the theories and Stephen Hawking and the universe when he found that there are black holes out there. Because we generally call it fancy mathematics, which is impervious to everybody. The same, what kind of dialogue which Mikio Kaku entered into when he came out with this theory of parallel universe, we have absolutely no idea, because they clearly engage with mathematical formula. Now, when such kind of things which are well defined and things with a certainty, they are brought to the classroom, what kind of dialogue first of all can happen in the classroom? What kind of character building can happen through that?
As a teacher of science, whereas you very rightly said that the concepts about the reality, about the universe or whatever phenomena, they're already crystallized. Now the point is, even then, I won't say that is the absolute truth about the reality. And as a student, there is, as a teacher, what I would like to excite is, first of all, I would like to have the different perceptions about that truth that is already being perceived and preached through the text room, the textbooks and the teachers and all that. It is already there, as I said, crystallized. So there are two things as a teacher I would like to keep in mind. One is, as you said, put the audience to the shoes of the opponent. So I would like to guess the perceptions of the students about those truths that I'm going to teach. What percepts they have. Everyone can have their own. Darwin say that man is a modified monkey, but the student might have an alternate view. I'm a biologist, that's why I'm citing this. So the student might have an alternate view. So I must elicit that first of all. I must guess the different perceptions about that particular reality that I'm going to clear. This is number one. Then the dialogue begins. But having said that, I'm not going to fridge and harp upon the same crystallized thought. The dialogue should be make them open to think about alternate truths about that, with a possibility being realized that it might as well be true. But the process of establishing that truth, alternate truth, of course should be through the process of science or the methods that we follow inside. It has to be evidence-based. Yes. But the point is, the first thing, before you raise the evidence, generate the evidence empirically or otherwise, logically, I mean, as you said, impervious mathematics. Mathematics is just a language to straighten your logic about whatever concept you have. That's how I see it. But the point is, my purpose is to convey, to teach my students that this is a fact, this is a truth about this phenomenon. What is your perception, first of all? I will have to state it through my dialogic process in the classroom if there is any perceptual error about that truth. Basic. And then also allow them to explore about any alternate truth, so that they can engage themselves in that self-dialogue that I have, that examination that I have mentioned about. They have to be engaged in some kind of examination. I would again repeat Socrates. Socrates said that, again very famously said, that an unexamined life is not worth living. So you examine. You teach them how to examine through the process of dialogue, through giving an option of alternate truths and alternate realities, and there is a process for it. So this is how my perception of dialogue and this is a character of a scientist. In the process, I also teach to look at the other point of view, to be tolerant about the other point of view, not to be dogmatic, not to hold on to something already established by some set of experiments and empirical process, that this is the final and this is the ultimate absolute truth. I cannot hold. So that should go into my character as a scientist. That should go into the character of a rational human being. So this is my ultimate objective, irrespective of my subject, is to enable the students to flourish, to come out into a wholesome, open-minded, tolerant individual. So for that, I think this kind of alternate options should be allowed, but through a process. And that process, underpinning that process, lies your character building process as well.
I think that's very profound thought that also prompted me to think further that one of the finest quality that happens in the science classrooms is you have a faith. Faith. You have faith in science. You have faith in the arrived at truth through whatsoever process, and then you further build on that truth. So the faith and the respect here is to the giant's shoulder, because I don't think any other discipline respects the giant's shoulder as much as science does. So that probably answers my question, and then the very moment you start building upon what is the established truth, dialogue again starts at a second level.
Right.
So something has been dialogically arrived at here, which has further been pursued here. So this is one quality I noticed, that there is a lot of faith in science by the pursuers of science. Indra would like to respond to that question, so he has expressed this desire.
Not in the present context. Faith in science, not in the present context.
Yes.
Well, I thought I would sort of quickly share my 2 cents as well. I mean, following the question that you posed, yes, but all scientific formulae are not absolute truths. They also go through different dialogues. Those dialogues, you can draw an analogy saying different environments. So, and my colleagues who are teaching in the science discipline can correct me. E equal to mc square is not correct in all environments, and probably it has got its own limitations. So E equal to mc square is objective representation of truth in a certain or in certain environments, but in not all environments. Thank you.
I think that kind of a philosophical approach to science prompts us to ask even many existential questions. Say, for instance, when we say 1 plus 1 is equal to 2 is based on an inherent notion of duality. Whereas the Vedic wisdom tells us that when fullness is taken away from fullness, fullness still remains. Fullness is added to fullness, fullness still remains. So probably...
Say it in the Sanskrit verse.
Purnamadam Purnamidam, yes, that one.
Say that.
Purnamadam Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnameva Avashishyate. I'm sorry, Avashishtate. I'm sorry, I'm not, I don't know Sanskrit at all. But I'm saying this actually, helps us pose this existential question that is duality granted or not? Probably that existence is singularity. And then that opens the scope of a philosophical discussion within science. Upasana, you teach a discipline which has this great possibility for dialogues. Also character building, because you are bringing in a superimposed reality to the class, which we call politics. Could you speak about that, the relationship between dialogue and character building?
Wow, I think I've said so much already, but actually, just to add to that and perhaps to answer your question in a slightly roundabout way, I was thinking about that, earlier we were speaking about that how dialogue is also there in silences, right? That everything does not need to be spoken for a dialogue to happen. And for the longest time, we were thinking of the science subjects as something that works in absolutes, that, it is an absolute truth and an absolute understanding. And so as part of my responsibilities as somebody who's looking after admissions and outreach at OP Jindal Global University, I also go and interact a lot with young school students, 10th, 11th, 12th students, and we were discussing something, and one of the students asked that, and we were talking about interdisciplinarity, and I think there is also dialogue inherent in interdisciplinarity because it talks about how disciplines dialogue with each other and interact with each other. And we were talking about social sciences and humanities and sciences and how the interactions happen. And one of the students asked me, but I want to become a doctor. And I'm very clear that I want to become a doctor. I don't think I would have to have anything to do with humanities and social sciences in my profession. That because, it's a very clear-cut, patients will come, I will cure, and I will send them off. Why do I need to engage with humanities, social sciences, have a dialogue with the disciplines of humanities and social sciences, and have an understanding of how society operates or how politics operates in order to be able to become a good doctor? And then we had this conversation about this example, and I said, say you're a doctor, you're a general physician, and a woman comes to you, and she comes to you and she's broken her ankle, and you're a wonderful doctor, and you've treated her, and she became okay, and she went back home. She comes to you 2 weeks later, and this time she has a broken wrist. So again, you're a wonderful doctor, and you cured her, and you sent her back. 3 weeks later, she's back again with a broken rib. You've done your job, you've cured her, and you sent her back. But at what point, perhaps, you have the emotional intelligence, the contextual intelligence, to investigate whether this could be a case of domestic abuse? Right? So you may start thinking that what I do, and if I do it correctly, I do not have to worry about dialoguing with others, with other contexts, with other disciplines. However, inherently, the lives that we lead are rooted in dialogue. That is one. Two, in a class like political science, or if I'm teaching gender studies, these are off because, the dialogues come from a sense of your inherent understanding of self and being. And to be able to let that go of self and being is key to initiating a dialogue. And therefore, I feel that as teachers are facilitators. I think at the end of the day, as teachers, we are facilitators of conversations and dialogues. And to be able to do that, one, going back to the earlier conversation, one has to realize one's own locations, biases, impulses, ideologies that one bring to the table, and be able to also engage with the biases, the prejudices, the ideologies and others that other bring to the table. Have a dialogue to first put it aside and perhaps then engage in something which will lead to something meaningful. And therefore, I think while dialogue is inherent to character building, it's not about the character that you're building of the other, it is also the character that you're building of the self in the process. I'll stop.
Thank you very much. So now, considering that we have shortage of time, I'll pose one question per panelist now.
Yes.
A very focused question. I would like to start with Professor Murag over here. There's a specific question which I would like to hear your opinion on. This is about the scope of science as a discipline to facilitate a dialogue. I'll read out my question. We have seen science in dialogue with other disciplines, and that dialogue of science yielding productive social and epistemic outcomes, of course the interdisciplinary collaborations. But is dialogue a means of knowledge production in science as much as it is in social science or humanities? Does not the objectivity of science foil the certainty, objectivity which we spoke about? Does not that foil any scope for a dialogue? On a lighter note, how scientists who otherwise do not belong to different scientific traditions, because when they belong to different scientific traditions, I'm sure there'll be a dialogue. Say a Newtonian and a quantum physicist can easily engage in a dialogue because they don't agree on anything. But otherwise, I would like to know, what do scientists speak if they accidentally met over a coffee?
Scientists meet.
Yes, two scientists belonging to the same tradition. What they have actually, because there is nothing much to disagree. That's why I'm saying, what kind of...
What grant can you apply to next?
What plans can you?
What grant can you apply to?
I think, first of all, let me clarify certain understanding that I have developed over the years. I do not see science as something very different, something very alien to what you call as the humanities and social science. To me, the paths are different, the approaches are different, but whether it is science or humanities, but ultimately the objective is to arrive at the understanding of the realization, appreciation of the reality. That is the truth. Our roads are different, our paths are different, our approaches are different, but then we all aim at arriving at the truth. So that's why the diversification comes. The path is the same, the methods are different. That is one thing. So having said that, when two scientists meet, as you said, from the same discipline, we would like to focus upon what next. Nothing has been achieved ultimately. We have our understanding is up to this point. And the conversation will automatically lead to what next? Or what is the answer for this. So ultimately it comes to questioning. Ultimately it comes to a dialogic process. And that will lead to approaches, empirical approaches, designing experiments, and get on with it. But the basic thing is when two scientists meet from the same background, they will raise questions. We now know that cancer happens through these mechanisms, right? What could be the reason for this mechanism? Could there be another answer to this question, that this happens only through this series of reactions? So these are the I think it's a process of endless, unending questioning, raising questions, and through the questions we move on to the process of that dialogic process of how to get answers to these questions. I hope I have satisfied
Thank you very much. It's absolutely profound. I mean, what prompted this question was the title of an article on parodying of scientific inventions, and that article was titled "When Einstein Meets Adam Smith." So that, because of course there is a lot to talk when there are a lot of things to talk when Einstein meets Adam Smith, but that's not the case when two scientists meet. But then you now mentioned one thing which I really love, that they talk about causality.
Yes.
Causality can be a subject matter of their dialogues. And also, one more thing I loved is you mentioned that every science course is also a truth appreciation course.
Yes.
Right. Indra, I'll come with the next question to you, then I'll move to Professor Sudarshan and then Upasana. Is speaking, right, I've defined speaking as a chain of acoustic blasts, right? Yeah, it's a chain of acoustic blasts. Is speaking essential in a dialogue? Can dialogue happen in silence? We have already touched this theme, but my question is that can dialogue happen in silence through listening, through the recognition of the presence of another person, through respecting safe spaces of the other? Within the scheme of things, what is the scope of dialogue in universities? A person who's otherwise not chirpy, how can this dialogue in silence?
So, again, going back to science, if I may, scientists would observe and write down notes. And through different observations, they would have field notes. So, in a given classroom, taking this conversation to a classroom, if someone is not saying something and merely observing and listening to the conversation, there is also a learning that is happening. You did not speak all the time. Because that person is probably being able to create the interlinkages of the dialogue or the conversation that is happening in the class. I would take this slightly forward and say that how would that help in meeting the objective of a classroom? With your permission, say in the case of evaluating a student. Evaluation is not about just whether the student is able to answer or whether the student is able to understand what is going on in the classroom, but it is more about how the student would interpret the dialogue that is happening in the classroom. So, even if a person is quiet, doesn't mean this person is not speaking, metaphorically speaking. And silence could be profound. I could be stunned because of a conversation that is happening that could come up on my face. I think that speaks a volume instead of just saying things. Thank you.
I've noticed that Sufi tradition is something which definitely glorifies silence, because Sufi tradition strongly believes in the silence speaking to the perceiver. Also, I remember this particular case of Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll, whereby when all the loquacious ones have done their jobs, people would prefer to sit next to Dr. Jekyll, sit under the cool shade of his silence. So there too, many times silence can speak, silence can convey volumes than any other chirpy ones. So Upasana, Professor Sudarshan, next question to you actually. I would like to talk a little bit about the subject and the self and the process of dialogue in thinking. Dialogue not in speaking, but dialogue in thinking. So most of the dialogues in this world have been between the subject and the self, what we otherwise refer to as thinking. How can this innate, inherent, intrinsic quality of individuals, because I know that we are born to know who we are, so inquisitiveness is very much in us, how this quality of individuals be effectively streamlined into the art of learning in higher educational institutions? How could we teach people to dialogue while thinking?
That requires a little reflection. But before I complete my thought on that, your question to Indranath reminded me of a famous incident, which is a dialogue between Ludwig Wittgenstein, a philosopher, and Piero Sraffa, who was an economist. So Wittgenstein had published this slim volume. It's called the Tractatus, Philosophico-Logicus Tractatus. He had written this in the trenches when he was in the war, and because he had been an undergraduate in Cambridge, Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore, two philosophers, invited Wittgenstein to submit this as a PhD thesis, the published book, and they awarded him the PhD. And it said that Wittgenstein told them, his examiners, I don't think you understand what I said here. You're giving me the PhD. Now, he was convinced that, and the thesis there was that a lot of problems of philosophy are really problems of language. And if you're clear about something, you know, the Tractatus ends with the lines that if you're whereof you cannot speak, you must pass over in silence. In other words, philosophical problems can be dissolved, not solved or resolved, but dissolved if you understand it depends on language. And he was sitting at dinner with Piero Sraffa, who's an economist, and from Italy. So Wittgenstein was explaining to him, this is his thesis, philosophical problems are problems of language. And Sraffa looked at him and did this. Now this is an Italian expression for, I doubt what you're saying. And that was a telling moment for Wittgenstein, because Sraffa didn't say anything. He just had a gesture. And that made Wittgenstein retract from his position. And later, when he published the Philosophical Investigations, he began to acknowledge that philosophical problems are not merely problems of language, that there's more to it than that. So it's possible, that you don't have to speak. And this was a famous dialogue where there was one gesture and two great minds. So I think it's important that the ability to introspect is essential. I mean, it's good to, after every, in a classroom session, to take a little time to introspect, about what you did or said. I was about to write to, Pranab Bardhan has written a wonderful account of his life. So it's called Charyavet or something, which means traveling, journeys. And he makes very interesting observations about a lot of people with whom he's there. So reading the book, I thought, now what about Pranab himself? Now somebody's got to write about what did Pranab Bardhan say when he was in the company of, Amartya or Kenneth Arrow or somebody like that. So this kind of, it's necessary to have this introspection. So in a way, it's about you may not know what you've got in your hands, so until you engage in some introspection, to refer to your self kind of position. There is the story of this washerman who used a stone to scrub the clothes. And, he had found it and he was scrubbing the clothes, and somebody said, this is very different. This is a very special kind of stone you're using. And somebody says, I'll give you some money for it. Can you sell it to me? And he doesn't. And later, he comes across a jeweler who says, what you're holding in your hands, scrubbing dirty clothes, is a raw diamond of very high carat, right? But you didn't know you had a diamond in your hand, right? So until you discover that, you don't know what you've got, right? So therefore it is necessary to engage in a dialogue with yourself in order to search for what is it that you've got, right? So it's a very important, profound question. And the answer to it is, you have to get to, the nature of the self and so on. And it's also another important point, since we're talking about science, that human beings are all self-interpreting agents. We are continually, in a way, examining and interpreting ourselves. The reason why disciplines in the social sciences that try to imitate the methods of the natural sciences get it wrong is that no matter what theory you have in natural science about how the planets will move, the planets will keep moving in that way. Your theory may change. But if you have a theory about how human beings would behave, the very knowledge that such a theory about human behavior has been published and somebody has internalized that knowledge will make that person change the behavior, right? So the data on the basis of which you formulated the theory can be contaminated immediately because you are a hermeneutically capable person. Everyone is. And therefore, there's an important thing to understand that knowledge in the social sciences is different from knowledge from the natural sciences. Imitating the methods of the natural sciences will not make your social science any more wonderful or certain. This is using a lot of mathematics and, as if it is a sign of great, intellectual advancement, is not going to help the social sciences. So if you're a social science teacher, you got to introspect about that what is the use of this knowledge. It's not as if it's useless, because human beings have regularities. Most people sleep at night and wake up in the morning, and there's a whole lot of regularities which you can deal with them. For instance, if you do statistics and you use a Poisson distribution, you can fairly accurately say how many deaths will happen on the roads in Delhi year after year. But you will not be able to say how that death will occur, where in Delhi it would occur, but you'd get a pretty good idea because of the patterns, right? So there is such a thing as a law of large numbers. So you can have you have some uses for this kind of knowledge, but you got to be all the time, particularly when teaching, anything in the social science, you got to be asking yourself, are we trying to explain something, or are we trying to predict something? And one of the things that we have to be on guard against, this introspection is necessary because very often knowledge is used, management for instance. There is a thin line between management and manipulation of people, exploitation of people, right? It's possible, therefore everyone who's engaged in teaching has to be introspecting all the time as to what are the possible misuses and abuses of the knowledge that you're transmitting. Yes. I mean, this kind of questioning is something that you must permanently do, that self-introspection, and then to say, what is it that I have got that, is going to be of interest and special to the students, right? Like you do. I mean, you read Pamuk and, you've got all these wonderful insights from it which you're sharing with us. That's what all of us ought to do as teachers.
Thank you. That's very profound. I'll just a quick tag to that. Of course, silence is never a weakness. And silence is never an answerlessness. The expression stoic silence clarifies absolutely that no, it's an answer, not an answerlessness. And also today morning we had a brief conversation in which we mentioned that there's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Yes. Solitude is being alone with yourself, in constant conversation with the body and the mind. But loneliness is that you are alienated from your own self. So there's a big difference between both. And finally, I'll just add to is that I think science is a place where conversation in silence happens. I mean, I'll just give the example of a cockpit. When the plane flies in autopilot and the pilots are sitting there and observing the technology's conversation with them. I mean, the technology's interaction with the human element there. So in science, of course, there is this conversation of individual and the machine keeps on happening. I'll come to the last question, and then we'll open the floor for the audience. This is something which we have touched upon, but still I believe you are the right person to answer this. So dialogue is definitely, ideally, should be a non-hierarchical communication aiming to discover the truth. But there is an underlying presumption in every dialogue that we are both equally informed, or the participants are equally informed. Well, that's not the case in a classroom. Yes. We know that. Moreover, in a classroom, given the instructive style we use, there should be some essential hierarchy because it's a beneficial hierarchy, the teacher teaching the student. Do you think in this kind of a framework, dialogue as a pedagogy succeed?
Wow, that's a tough one. I'll come to that, and I really want to answer that. I just want to say one thing about the conversation on silence, and Professor Sudarshan was talking about this book on one who has been wandering, and you talked about city. So in French, there is a word called flaneur, to talk about the wanderer. So flaneur is the idea of the wanderer, the one who moves and seamlessly gets into cities and one observes. But there was, for a longest time, never the idea of a flaneuse. So there was not a female equivalent of the idea of the flaneur. And that silence told you a lot about the fact that either women were not wandering the cities, or the cities were not safe enough for women to wander, or they were not cities which were accessible for women to wander. So silences tell stories. The silence, but you have to have also the introspection, as Professor Sudarshan said, to be able to read those silences. For example, when the Indian women's movement in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s was talking about women's right to work and was talking about anti-dowry and was doing movements against price rise, suddenly one has realized that the Dalit women were silent in this movement. And then from the 80s you started having autonomous Dalit women's assertions, and the idea that perhaps the Indian women's movement was representing only the middle class, upper caste women for the longest time. So the silences of the Dalit women spoke a lot about the way caste and gender operate in the context of the Indian women's movement. A parallel can be drawn in the context of the West, when during the second wave of feminism, coming out of a suffrage where both the African American women and the white women participated, the second wave of feminism, when women were asking the right to work, the black women were not part of that conversation. And they said, but we have always been working, and we were working as help in your homes. Right? So the silence of the African American women in the second wave of radical feminism, when one said personal is political, spoke a lot about how race operated in the context of gender and feminism and waves of feminism in the West. So there is a lot to read in silences, but one has to have the courage of conviction and the fierceness of will to be able to reflect on those silences and understand what those silences say. The same thing can happen in the context of the classroom. I teach a course called Gender, War and Conflict. It's a tough course to teach because it is, by the very nature, is engaging with things that are sometimes difficult material to engage with. And in the beginning, I was having conversations around gender, and a lot of these students were talking about what it meant to be a woman and what it meant to be a man, and masculinity and femininity. And this one student used to be always silent. She was engaged. She was not disengaged from the conversation in the classroom, but was always silent. And I took her aside and I had a personal conversation with her, and I said that I know that you're engaged. I know you're reading. I know you are present. Is there something that stops you from speaking? Is it a shyness that you are unable to speak, or that you're not comfortable speaking to peers? And then she said, no ma'am, I'm gender fluid and I don't know where to place myself in this conversation which is predominantly about men and women. So I had to restructure my entire conversations in the classroom so that she feels included. So as teachers, we also have to be also open to those kind of silences, because her silence was the story of her life. So I feel that silences tell stories, but we have to be open to be able to think about those silences in the right way. What was the other question?
Well, that was about the kind of, even though dialogue should ideally be non-hierarchical.
Yes, yes, I got it. Yes. See, the classroom is a very interesting space. As often, I think Indra and Srijit and I have always interacted about things like it's an egalitarian space. You want to walk into the classroom and tell students there is no hierarchy, speak your mind. And then you realize that it's going nowhere. So it is also important, I feel, and I'm happy to engage with disagreements. But see, power does not always have to be spelled out. Power exists in all situations. As Foucault says, it is like a capillary. It is there everywhere. You do not see it every time, but it is there. And there are power that also is exercised through norms. Again, what Foucault says, the normalization of power. So you walk into the classroom, you take attendance, right? And you tell a student, you come in late to my class, you are out. That is an exercise of power. I have it, my student does not. So therefore, I feel that you need experience to be able to exercise power in the right way, but never, I at least in the context of the classroom, don't let go of the notion that I do have that power. Because every class is not the same. Every student is not the same. Every student is not engaging with you in the same openness that you might want to engage with. So therefore, I feel while I want to have a non-hierarchical, egalitarian space in the classroom where everyone is open to speak, I have to make sure that that is A, happening in a respectful manner, B, everyone has a chance to speak, and C, my egalitarianism and my way of coming at it in a non-hierarchical manner should not be looked at as my inability to be able to impose or create structures in the class. So I think it's a very fine balance to make. For faculty who have just started teaching, who are young faculty, they're often challenged in the classroom. Very often, particularly female faculty, are challenged in the classroom. The students may come to you aggressive. They may want to see how much you are able to push. So in our spirit of egalitarianism and having a non-hierarchical dialogue, we cannot let go of the fact that we need to maintain discipline and also come from that position where one is willing to engage with that open-minded dialogue with you. It's a fine balance, but it is an important balance to strike. And I think the fact that we are having these dialogues, doing these workshops, help us arrive at that fine balance.
I think that's your very invocation of Foucault is the answer to my question, because Foucault spoke about the kind of power relationships which govern human socialization. But maybe that what Foucault spoke about, or what Foucault called as power, is actually the very social energies that keep us socializing or that keep us in motion. Unfortunately, he gave the term power to define that. But then we know that we move from one power relationship to another power relationship. We move to family, the father becomes the epicenter of the power. In a patriarchal family, you move to your hostel, the smartest one among you become the epicenter of power. So the power relationships keep on changing. That's why I use this expression, essential beneficial hierarchy in a classroom, which probably we need to capitalize on. And also,
the best kind of classrooms, according to me, is that one does not have to spell it out, but one knows that there is power that operates.
I mean, it's ironical that I have to end this session on dialogue with emphasis on silence. Emphasis on silence. I would also like to emphasize one of the most powerful silences I have seen is the silence of Bhuvaneshwari Bhaduri in Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? The suicide of Bhuvaneshwari Bhaduri. But through that suicide, she continues to speak. I mean, it didn't, well, she spoke volumes through that one act of suicide, which she has chosen at a certain period in her life to commit, and then she continues to speak. So that's a very powerful message. The second one is something I recently read, again, sorry to go back to fiction. This is a novel by Sachidanand, Malayali novelist, with the title Govardhan's Travel. So you all might know Govardhan in Chaupat Raja, Andheri Nagari, or Andheri Nagari Chaupat Raja, whereby Govardhan was doomed to go. Well, Govardhan was declared to be hanged till death because Govardhan happened to have a slender neck and the noose of the king fit only Govardhan's neck. Now here, Govardhan belongs to Bhardendu Harishchandra's drama, Andheri Nagari Chaupat Raja. And then this gentleman feels that Govardhan has been silenced there, who had to give up his life simply because of the stupidity of a king. Bhardendu Harishchandra is going back, using the power of the pen, liberating Govardhan. You go now. I am taking you out of the death. You are liberated at this moment when you were about to die. Now you go ahead and ask this question. The rest of the novel by Sachidanand is about Govardhan going around and asking this question. He's meeting Amir Khosru, he's meeting Kalidasa, he's meeting Gandhi, he's meeting Umrao Jan and asking this question, what was my fault? I mean, why injustice was meted out to me? My only problem was that I had a slender neck. So interestingly, that he was breaking the silence. That did not give relief to Govardhan, but at least there was a catharsis. Govardhan roamed around, nomadic, vagabond, but he never got an answer to his question, but still that it was a catharsis. Now, thank you very much to all the panelists here. You all spoke with great depth, great insight. I learned a lot listening to all of you. But before that, as I've mentioned, answers are the greatest means to ask questions. We have the panelists to answer your questions. We'll keep it limited for 10 minutes because we are towards our end. So please, the forum is open.
After a long time, today I'm in a real classroom, that too with 5 teachers, 5 erudite teachers. It's a really pleasureful and insightful. Thank you very much. So, I always start my class in law for law students. I always used to say, do you know what is the difference between man and animal? They say in different ways. The difference between man and animal is we have the sense of improvement. Animals do not have sense of improvement. It is not my say. It is said by Lord Acton. So they are also, to some extent, they are also more disciplined than us, more rational than us even, the ants, the elephants, for example. But we have the sense of improvement. So evolution takes place in our society. And what we have discussed about the dialogue, I think that the dialogue to spell out the truth and the truth to spell out the justice. So, truthfulness is must. When I enter in my class, if some teachers, they want to say that I'm strict in my class. But he is not strict on himself or herself, that I'm not coming on time, I'm not punctual, I'm not student-friendly. I'm unable to touch the untouched students. I'm unable to reach the unreached students. Then truthfulness is not there. So it's a kind of dialogue with the students because they have different mindsets. If you allow me to share one thing, a few days before, one student, he was not attentive to his class. Then the class teacher said, "Why you are not attentive?" He said, "It is not your burden, sir. It is my burden." It is true. This is the mindset of the students. So in that way, it is true. And once I asked one student, "Why you are not attentive in the classes?" Says, "What sir is teaching, it is available in the net." More available in the net. So many big challenges are coming. So thing is, the one how it can be started, how the process can be started. Then I don't know whether it is true or false. And there's a big wall in between East Germany and West Germany. Once the East Germany, they had thrown some garbages, big amount of garbages to the West Germany. Next day, the West Germany, they thrown back some good things, chocolate, gift item, ice cream, and one tag was there. People give what they have. This may be the starting point of dialogue. What we have discussed about the silence. So this is I think this is very challenging, and to clarify and classify the things. This is the science, sir. This is the science. Why the leaves are green? Due to presence of the chlorophyll. So we have to clarify and classify the things. Here too, in terms of our pedagogy, we have to classify and clarify the things. What is useful in one place may not be useful in other places. So mindset, we have to read the mindset of the students as well as the mindset of the teachers. Then you have what you have rightly said about the curriculum. It's a very important thing. Curriculum is very important factor in terms of the pedagogy. So then we can go ahead with all the positive things. And interpretation is must. Then without interpretation, we cannot evaluate the thing. Interpretation is must, I think. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. And maybe there are more comments.
Take all the
yeah.
comments.
Yes. It was very interesting to hear all of. Coming from political science, let me put things very straightforward. I was very interested in Professor Gupta when you said dialogue is like two parallel lines which may meet at infinity. And Professor Upasana Mahanta when you said that dialogue is also the power of listening. Now, in connection with what Professor Bhuban Barua had just said, I feel there should have been a little more discussion about the increasing challenges being posed by AI towards dialogue. You know, as I walk into the class, I'm having a preconceived notion that some of my students are maybe better than me. Not because that they are better than me, but because they are being pushed by AI. Now, how do I confront them, or how do I take that challenge? Because someone just mentioned sometimes we have to be very careful in the classroom. Now, when I go into the classroom these days, I find that some of the students are not listening, or they are in their own world. Now, as a teacher, how do I take that? That's a challenge for me, because I don't want to question him at the master's level. I don't want to question him at the master's level, why you are not listening to me, because it's his prerogative whether he listens to me or he's not interested. He might walk out of the class, grab a cup of coffee, come back to the class. I have no issues. But I want to know, how do I tackle this challenge of a student coming better prepared with the help of AI?
So knowingly or unknowingly, I am also a believer that dialogue is the path to excellence, or rather learning. And I'm a believer, and since my school days, I would like to attend those classes where my teachers were where they were giving me opportunities to discuss, rather than just taking the class and giving us notes or something like that. And joined Royal Government University 2 years back, and I'll be straightforward like sir. And my colleagues, or I will rather say some seniors who are here, or some of them have left, have told me one thing, like, give notes to the students. But I am a believer of dialogue, and I like to initiate discussions in the class rather than giving direct notes to the students. But however, there is a pressure, let's say the students' feedback, and because now students, as sir is saying, prepared by AI, or maybe because of the COVID and everything, they are all spoon-fed nowadays. They have given abundance of reading materials, dictated notes and everything. Now, I have seen my colleagues, some of them, rather than dialoguing in the class, which I enjoy, and I have seen results of it, but then they prefer giving them notes in the classes. So what is your viewpoint on that? Like, should we give them notes? I do give them reading materials, make PowerPoints where I can give them like the main pointers, so that we can start a discussion and they can discuss. But then there are people I have seen who are giving true notes that are being asked in the exams, will come directly, and they are we have seen a good result out of it. But then I think we are losing the excellence there. So I want to know your point on that.
Yes.
It was a wonderful discussion about silence. Silence, you have said, ma'am, it's a very powerful, expression, because right to information, right to speech and expression, Article 19(1)(a) is freedom of speech and expression. But even silence is an expression, is a form of expression, was also dwelled by the Supreme Court of India, because in Bijo Inamal's case, when 3 children were not singing the song, singing the national anthem, Jana Gana Mana, and they were expelled from the school. And finally the Supreme Court says that yes, right to silence is there, because they had joined their hands and they kept in silence. So when the students are silent, we have to think twice why they are silent, isn't it? So I just want to know.
Dialogue starts the moment we as teachers walk into the class, because the first question is posted there. They don't say it loudly, of what use you are for us. This is the first question we get. This is not my proposition. Professor Bakshi has mentioned this, that get ready to start the class by answering this question. So that means you have to prove before the student, not that you know better than them, but you are a certain voice. that your lived experience, your gender identity, your cultural identity, everything might have given you a certain voice. Make them clear that you are a certain voice, it's worth listening to you. Then, first of all, you have to move away from being Mr. to the teacher. I mean, what E.H. Brathwaite in his novel To Serve With Love would say, when he first walks into the class, students say, look, there is a black man. And 2 years later, they say, look, he's not a black man, he's our teacher. So that's carving that identity from being someone to be a teacher, and there the acceptance starts. So it's not all about showing that we are better than them or they are smarter. We are a certain voice, and each one of us is special in that sense. Telling students that you are a certain voice is the first step. I'll probably go in the reverse order, maybe. Start with you, Upasana.
Okay. I think the beginning two questions are quite interconnected, is about what to do in the classroom. I think one, Srijit, you've already responded to that by saying that perhaps it's very important to let the students know what is it that you bring into the classroom. For the longest time, we have been living in a kind of tradition where the teacher is to be not questioned, and that the only job of the teacher is to impart knowledge. Perhaps there is no knowledge to impart, but perhaps it is about helping them making sense of the knowledge, right? Even before AI and the chat GPTs of the world, those who would read and have access to resources will have answers to questions that they want to ask. AI just make it easy for you to have that access. If you want to really see, there were libraries even before AI, even before Google search. So my response to this is that perhaps we need to be very clear on what our role as teachers are in the classroom. Is it to impart knowledge, and what that knowledge is? Is it factual knowledge? Is it, theoretical knowledge, intellectual knowledge? Or is it to help students to make sense of the knowledge and the resources they may now already have at their disposal easily because of access to AI and other kinds of tools? That is one. Two, perhaps, and despite the way we concluded on the questions of hierarchy and power, perhaps it is to make sure that the classroom is not an us versus them. It is not the me versus the student conversation. And that's why, and we will talk in more detail in the session that I would facilitate with all of you in the second half on curriculum design and thinking about curriculums in new and imaginative ways, and perhaps to make it very clear to students at the very beginning what is the goal of a course, what are the key learning outcomes that you're looking to get. So the students may have information. For example, say I walk into, because you said political science and because I teach political science too, say I walk into a class and I want to teach the concept of state. Right? Now, there are multiple different ways to teach the concept of state. The AI will tell you one idea of state, this is state, these are the theories of state, this is Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau and so. They gave these concepts of state of nature and why we came to state and and they have all that information already in their hand. And if they do, then perhaps a conversation could be that how do we start making sense of what Locke said, what he said, what Hobbes said, what he said. Right? For example, Hobbes had zero belief on the goodness of human nature. Right? Hobbes said in the state of nature, life is solitary, poor, brutish, nasty. Right? He believed that human beings are inherently dubious and so and so. But why? So if the student already knows that, I'm just trying to give you an example, and the AI has already told the student as to what are the key ideas of Hobbes, perhaps an interesting thing to do is to take it from there and ask the student to reflect that why do you think Hobbes would say such a thing about human nature? Right? And perhaps the conversation could that be about the Civil War and about the context in which Hobbes was writing, about the kind of bloodshed and brutality that Hobbes saw, where he was led to believe that monarchy and absolute authoritarianism is perhaps the only answer to reign in the chaos, and therefore he creates an hypothetical state of nature. Right? Locke, on the other hand, was trying to because by the time you have some sense of property, and monarchy has to give in to now this new propertied class that has emerged, Locke has to start thinking about now new and imaginative ways when he can think about the properties class retaining that property. Right? Therefore, anything you mix as your labor with becomes your property. So instead of perhaps going through that these are the 5 things Locke says, we start investigating about where this idea of property came from. Why did he want to defend the right to property and make it an inalienable right? And have a conversation about how do you see reflections in contemporary times? Do you see any relevance to the ideas of Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau for that matter? Rousseau, I find it very interesting whenever I teach Rousseau in the class, because one looks at Rousseau as somebody who talked about the will of people, as Rousseau as somebody who talked about, laid the foundations of popular sovereignty. But Rousseau's will of all did not include the will of women. Rousseau was one of the biggest philosophers to speak against women. He said that will of all implicitly means will of all men. For him, heads of households were essentially men. Right? And therefore later Mary Wollstonecraft, when she wrote Vindications of the Rights of Women, was actually a direct rebuttal of Rousseau's Emile. So, so the students may have understandings about, say in a political science class, what is state and what is Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau and what they said, but how do we make the conversations interesting in a way that they are able to make sense of what AI or a book or a textbook is giving them, right? So for that, one has to be, as a teacher, very clear on the goals of learning that you have for the class, to be able to think and reflect critically on what is happening in the classroom. So a political science theory class does not have to be about just understanding the theory which the AI has already given the student, but also how to make sense of the theory, how to apply that theory. Is there any relevance to that theory? And that could be a dialogue. So perhaps it is a good thing that the students are better prepared, because it forces us as teachers to be better prepared, forces us as teachers to be more reflective and think that what is it that I'm going to do in class today that not only keeps the student excited about what they are going to learn, but keeps me excited about what we are going to talk about in the classroom today. So I think when we keep thinking about, inciting curiosity without really thinking about where does the curiosity lies within us. And perhaps that is a more important journey for a teacher, and that might help. And I'm again saying that there is no black and white, there is no one answer to things, but collectively perhaps we can think of ways in which we can overcome this. Everything fails, ban laptops in the classroom.
Having listened to Upasana, what comes to my mind is absolutely clear that, the paradigm shift that is being talked about in different policies and directives that we see today, that so long our classroom has been teacher-centric, we have to make it student-centric. But without going to this kind of very common rhetoric, what I would say that classroom is, you do not expect the students that they are illiterate. They are expected to come to the class literate with certain basic things. That is why we put up the lesson plans, hand over the references before coming to the classes. So therefore, we expect a crowd in the classroom, students who are knowledgeable. Our point is how to make it meander through discussion and debate, not teaching, the way we understand. It should be a classroom for, again, dialogue, discussion. Make them thoughtful, enable them to raise questions, and get on with the discussions. And I think they are capable of doing that. Maybe the level may be different, but it is a place where we are expecting to have students who are already coming with some background knowledge and information. AI facilitates, super facilitates in a way, but then that is very mechanical. It's not organic. We have to convert the classroom dialogue into a very organic thing. AI thing is very robotic. Right? The Google search is very robotic, I would say. But you have to read and understand and internalize what is there, and then come up with your questions. And that is the success of the teacher in the classroom. I think this is my answer. And about notes and all that, they are very mundane things. I think they are rather very corrupt. I think it's like giving a reference. Give them as many references as possible, as many books as possible. Make them read, not cram. They want the note to cram. That is a challenge. We have to change it's a cultural challenge. Right.
So note is not a sign of excellence.
It's not.
You have to go in search of that. Pursuit is what matters.
It's an expression of corruption, academic corruption of the highest order.
No, sir, I was saying it's better to say there are nodes out there. Please go in search of excellence. In search of it. Okay. Professor Sudarshan, please.
Well, I started my academic life after a small amount of teaching in Cambridge as the Dean of the School of Government and Public Policy. And somehow there's, the title Dean instills a certain kind of anxiety and fear among the students. I dare say some of my colleagues as well. And so when I'm in the classroom, they're all, nervous because, in their imagination, I'm some kind of, powerful person in front of them. So firstly, I prefer to co-teach because then you set up a dialogue with your fellow teacher, preferably from a different viewpoint on some things. So that helps. But the way I get over this is by telling stories. If you tell a story, everybody will remember it, will get interested in it. We are naturally, human beings are storytelling animals. That's one distinction between animals and human beings, is that we tell stories. So I think telling stories is useful. Upasana was in fact saying, if you tell a story about Rousseau or Hobbes, the circumstances in which they lived and what they were doing, that kind of a thing is of interest, and the retention of that is greater because you can do that. So that's the way I overcome this kind of nervousness that students have because the dean is there and should they open up and speak and so on. Even my colleague the other day in the International Women's Day, whom I co-teach, she was saying something and then she said, "Oh, my dean is here," right? So you need to be able to get that over, right? So there's a certain friendliness is built up in the classroom that can be done. I mean, it's not impossible. And once you do that, and then you can't leave, you finish the class and you walk out and you're mobbed by students who want to continue the conversation and the lesson, and that's very satisfying.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sudarshan. Maybe over to
So I have a different take on the point that you made about notes. We also need to be very sensitive about the training that students have thus far, how they have prepared themselves, what kind of expectations that different exams had of them. So I think that sort of, they are also going through a phase of transition. Going forward, if we say them that, instead of expecting notes from us, why don't you prepare notes and show it to me of what you have understood? They probably would, learn something more out of it. So transition is one phase. And I think as to the question of AI, yes, we have ChatGPT. We probably would have different large language models coming up as well. AI, it's what we are feeding, right? So essentially, if we are feeding the right kind of information, then probably would dish out the right kind of information, right? So AI probably, and this is what I see, because when computers were used at a commercial level, I'm thinking of 1980s, right? People thought that, it will take up all our jobs. I think that was the fear, right? And we were very, very circumspect about computers. Now we are very, very anxious about AIs, right? Because it is posing an existential question, I would imagine. But AI essentially is facilitating, to what my colleagues have said, facilitating access to information, right? Which puts us in an advantageous situation, us meaning the community at large. Because then you can take the dialogue to the next level and not really think about, what is an answer to a certain question. So as a teacher, as a facilitator, our task, as I see, is to have those nuanced arguments in class and debates in class and have a dialogue in class and not really leave it at what others have said. I think those are the nodal points that AI nor any other language in the future would be able to figure out. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. Thank you very much. So we have come to the end of this panel, but unlike many other panels which are time-bound, that we at least got a lot of time to speak, I was able to complete all the questions I had, and I'm sure audience also got a fairly good chance to engage with them. So we have concluded with this note that even though we have named this panel Dialogic Practice, we could say that dialogue is an art of living. Dialogue is actually the very means for our own willing and acting. It is actually an art of self-perfecting. So we are in constant dialogue, whether we are chirpy or not, whether we open the mouth or not. The constant dialogue continues, even in silence, even in meditation, even in our very existence. So thank you very much. I thank all the panelists, Professor Mahanta, Professor Burgoyne, Professor Sudarshan, Professor Gupta. So I request, may I solicit a loud round of applause for our distinguished panelists. Thank you. We have come to the end of this panel.
So Sujit, a big thank to you for moderating
Yes.
the session so brilliantly.
Yes.